So we're talking about Rise of an Empire today. Obviously, there were differences between this shoot and the original 300 in terms of like getting guys in shape where they were. What was the biggest challenge for you?
On the original, it was sort of an ideal setup in a way that allowed us to have training space for both all the stunt work and our gym and a kitchen where we fed everybody all in one place. And that's where the massage practitioner did her work. It's where the acupuncture people came, twice a week, and the physical therapist came twice a week. Everything all in one location, and everybody who was, training in our space could be seen by people who were doing their stunt work, and then we'd cycle through, and we ran 6 or 7 classes a day, and so it was super easy for us to, they came in, we fed them breakfast, they trained a little bit, then a snack a couple hours later, and then a little bit more training, and then lunch, and then a snack a couple hours after that, and a takeaway dinner if they wanted it. So, and on the sequel, the most difficult thing was that we were spread in the beginning, spread all over the world, virtually. I mean, I was to start, I had, and Ellie and Jamie were in Sofia with a couple of the actors and virtually all the stunt crew. I was in Paris with Eva Green. Michael, my assistant, was in South Africa with Sullivan. Lena was training wherever she was. Sometimes it was Los Angeles. She stopped in London a little bit. So we had that setup going. Callan was in Australia. David Wenham was, working under the tutelage of one of our instructors in Australia. And it seems like there was, and Hans Mathens actually started here with Andy McKenzie before going to Sofia. So it was trying to assemble all of these moving parts. And I started with Rodrigo in Los Angeles, and then he went home and kind of followed on. Then he came to Sofia at the same time I did. So managing all the moving parts made it really different. And on the original, everybody formed into a really tight team. Actors, stunt guys. And it didn't happen in the same way on this one because of that, disparate training locations and that kind of thing. That was I think for me, the hardest part.
So was the brief similar for both the films? Like just get them like lean?
Yeah, I mean, in the original, there was, Zach and I basically had a little meeting, and he said, look, he was more interested in how they interacted together. From a filming point of view, and I was just interested in uncovering what was already there, building it, and I said, look, I need a lot of time, and I want these guys to look scary. I mean, to be really as lean as possible in a way, and they don't have to be big because the camera's going to make them look big. I mean, Zach could film in a certain way, so these guys looked gigantic, and on the second one, it was interesting because it's a movie about citizen soldiers, in a sense, and people for whom they're not Spartans necessarily. And there is a big, kind of a difference, an obvious difference when the Spartans roll in the Rise of an Empire. Just like, okay, which one of these things is not like the other, in a sense. And I think that's was the brief. Like, okay. Yes, you're not going to, I wasn't, going to have the same amount of time. I wasn't going to have the same amount of control as on the first one. But the standard of physicality was going to be, was briefed to me as being a bit lower. But the original one set the bar really high. And movies and television series that followed after that rose to a similar level. So I was not comfortable, let's say, with keeping the bar low. I mean, because I've seen the citizen soldiers, and I wanted them to be as physical as possible, and then just when the Spartans show up, make them sort of ultra, and have that be the difference.
Mm-hmm. And who among the cast of the kind of across the two films impressed you the most with their work ethic? What did you
say? On the first one, I'd have to say that Vincent Regan was the star in terms not only of transformation but how he did it. He's an actor. He comes from a theater background. He's for sure the only guy who has ever recited Shakespeare in the middle of a hard workout, and sold it at the same time. But and when we started, he was the guy who sat in front of me in the sort of intake interview, and I just looked at him, and then I went to Zach later and said, look, I'm really good at what I do, but I don't know. And he just said, do your best. And Vincent, ultimately he said, look, I want to be totally method with this. I want to train as hard as you want me to train. I'm going to do exactly as you say. And he did. I mean, he was with us in the gym 5 days a week, 1 day training on his own on the weekend, and took 1 rest day. And so, there is a series of pictures out there, but he lost 40 pounds over the course of 8 weeks, and all of his strength numbers went through the roof, and his rowing numbers, and the work ethic I think that he applies to his craft, he applied it to the training, treating it as a craft as well. Mm-hmm. And then for this, on both of them, Andrew Plevin again, his work ethic was amazing when he was there doing it, and I'll drop the dime on him right now. On his own, he doesn't have the same sort of thing. It's really hard to manage. A lot of what happens with a work ethic kind of thing. I mean, on the original, after the first week of training, I made everyone train without their shirt on. And the male ego is a wonderful thing to manipulate, is all I can say, is that sometimes the shame of that was, everybody knew who was, letting it go on the weekend and who was staying true to the goal. And Rich Citrone, who is one of the stunt players, I've worked with him a lot, and he's a guy who's, he's 2 years older than me, so he's 55 now, and indistinguishable from, and certainly one of the best Spartan bodies in the original, and I've had the opportunity to work with him later on, Man of Steel, and again right now, and he's a guy who's absolutely amazing, and then for this also on the sequel, both Lena and Eva were dedicated. Eva, overcame a lot. I made it, even though we took baby steps, I made it really hard on her because we had a pretty short timeline. And coming from, a background not, steeped in sports history or physical history, it was amazing to see how she, quote, manned up, unquote, to play the role. And her physicality is an integral part of that role. And then Lena is just tough. And I enjoyed training her and watching her. It just, unfortunately, it wasn't, I couldn't spend as much time with her as I wanted to. But again, she'd show up and work really hard, and then maybe she'd go next door and do a little Thai boxing. And to hear her express herself hitting the pads in the Thai gym, I was just like, oh, man, I'm glad I'm not in there with her.
Awesome. Can I ask, something you touched on there was, you got the guys to train with their shirts off, but you need those guys around you to give you that intensity, right? So for guys who, want to get in better shape, want to make a change to themselves, but maybe don't have a Jim Jones-style facility, what do you recommend to them?
I think the most important thing is to use the mirror as the tool that it can be. Because if you're training in a global gym, if you're, if you don't have someone to, raise the intensity level for you, someone to push you higher or pull you up, someone to inspire, someone to hold you accountable, then you have to do it on your own. And it's probably the most difficult thing that there is. Because human nature-wise, we get away with settling for less because there's no consequence. So, and the mirror, we don't have them in our gym necessarily, at home, but when I'm working on films, we often have mirrors because they can provide positive feedback, which might be inspiring for some, or, a boatload of negative feedback especially in the beginning of a process with someone. And so I think, and they're in every global gym, and I think people misuse them because they're dishonest about what they see. They're because they don't want to necessarily do the work. That it's what their goal is going to require. So I think using that tool honestly, I think using setting up an objective and either a penalty or a reward for achieving it or not achieving it. Some people I think are more motivated. I think there was a great scene in a James Bond movie a while ago. Let's see, it's the one with Klaus Maria Brandauer, who is the villain, so that must be Never Say Never, maybe, the Connery comeback? Anyway, they play a little video game against each other, and when you lose the round in the video game, you get an electric shock. And the more terrain you lose, or the more, the greater the stakes, the higher the shock. And I think that's how we should set up our training. There has to be some kind of consequence to not achieving a declared goal. And for that, generally, you'll have to have some friends to hold you accountable. And if you set it up right, you'll have people lining up to hold you accountable if the penalty is strong enough.
Fair enough. I know there was a lot of confusion about like the 300 workout when the film first came out, and
Yes.
and people just thinking they could do the 300 workout. And I know you don't want to do anything like that, but are there sort of movements that people should emphasise in their training if they want to get a sort of functional?
No, on the original with it was unfortunate from our perspective. Like we allowed, because we didn't take ownership of everything, because I wasn't really interested in talking about it. Other people spoke for us, and that was where a lot of the confusion came from. Because people would ask me questions, and I'd just say, no, that was a thing. I don't know that I want to talk about it. And unfortunately, that became, what was originally created as a test, a crucible, similar to what young Spartan boys went through. It got sort of co-opted as something, a workout to be done or to be changed and then done to the to the degree that someone could do it, and all of the movements in it are valuable movements, and I think they're things that people should be doing. Even if you're training, if somebody's training in a Globo Gym style situation, virtually every tool that we had, yes, there's a pull-up bar in the Globo Gym. You should be doing pull-ups. There are boxes to jump on generally in the Globo Gym, or in every space that we go. People should be doing box jumps. The deadlift, again, not. I'm going to say. Ultimately, yes, everyone should deadlift, because it's a movement that basically requires you to engage musculature from your toes all the way to the grimace chain of muscles. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, and that doesn't mean to do it heavy. That doesn't mean to go crazy. It doesn't mean to do 50 deadlifts in a row for speed, which is what was involved in that test. At what basically amounts to 60 kilos or 62 kilos or something like that. No, that's not the thing. The movement is important. The way you structure the reps and the weight and that kind of thing is going to be completely individual. Kettlebell clean and press, same kind of thing. Why not? I think it's maybe the kettlebell snatch is probably could be a more interesting movement, and combine that with with a simple press or jerk. But again, all of these movements are done. Requiring body control. You're doing it in sort of a three-dimensional plane as opposed to having the movement range restricted by a machine. Most of them carry a degree of risk, which makes you, which I think is important because it keeps people honest. And then the only movement I would say that was in there that is a bit misunderstood and maybe doesn't necessarily have a place was this floor wiper thing. But ultimately I wanted to have some kind of abdominal thing that couldn't really be cheated. Turns out you can cheat that. Turns out also that it's a insane problem for your shoulders more than anything. But I think every other movement within that can be part of a pretty broad and valuable training program.
I remember you changed. You invented a new one called 300 FY, right? Can you explain that, maybe?
Why not? After seeing variations, let's say, I'll be nice, variations on the 300 workout, posted to YouTube and that kind of thing. People scaling it back to a certain weight, and that was accommodating for them. People not doing full range of motion movements, which we monitored and insisted upon when people were actually going through the test workout. And so I was just tired of people scaling and dropping the weight for the deadlift because they couldn't do it, or using a lower box, or not doing full range of motion on some of the other some of the other pieces. So 300 FY came about. It's a pretty awful workout that you do on an Airdyne, which is sort of fan bicycle that also has moving handles for your arms, and it was specifically done on the AD4, which they're hard to find these days, unfortunately. But it was the requirement was to do 300 calories in 10 minutes. And that's, I think, an average of 425 or 426 watts, something like that you have to maintain for 10 minutes. If you do 299 calories, then FY, fuck you, you did not do the workout. Therefore, you can't say you did it. And we've had a lot of people. There's nothing that makes Rob McDonald happier than for someone to attempt that workout and do 293 calories, 297, 299 is the absolute best, and it has happened because the person was almost there. It would have just taken a little bit more effort somewhere in the middle, minute 6, minute 7, and they would have had it, but now they have to do it over. And so for him, he's just like, oh, clowns and balloons, this is fantastic. And so that's how that workout got developed, was because we were, look, the standards for weight and box height, it's fixed. Doesn't matter what you weigh, doesn't matter who you are, and it didn't on the movie. Everybody had to use the same weight. Everybody had to, for the big guy, pull-ups are going to be harder. Well, get stronger.
Mm-hmm. Something else you talked about was the kind of nutrition side of things. Like, what are the kind of basics that you would advise to anybody, I guess?
I think the basics of nutrition, it's largely individual or done according to the project.
Mm-hmm.
So it's goal. I say eat for an objective. Mm-hmm. So, and what I've had people do on the original 300, on the sequel, I would not necessarily recommend for everyone, mm-hmm. Because it's calorie restriction. And it's done specifically for a particular outcome tied to a particular deadline, with a lot of risk or a lot of money, let's say, and we'll just call that risk, riding on it. So that's the kind of thing where, I'm happy to do it because the people, and trying to obey rule number 1, which is no one gets hurt, but I wouldn't recommend it necessarily outside, because most of those guys were eating on the original. I don't think anybody was eating more than 2,000 calories a day. Many of them 1,800, that's not sustained. The shoot lasted over 4 months. There was a Christmas break in the middle where some people obviously went out of their, went far beyond the calorie total. But to have that little food and to be required to do the, physical work 6 to 8 hours a day, which, physical training and stunt training combined, that's how those guys got that lean. It's pretty simple. For most people, my recommendation is going to, it's going to depend on, again, the objective. If it's, somebody's going through our Man of Steel mass gain program, well, you get to eat whatever you want. And by the time you're through with that block of training, you're going to be so sick of eating and so sick of being sore that you're basically dying to get on the leaning phase so that you don't have to eat 5,000 calories or more a day, and lift heavy weights all the time. So it's gonna depend. Again, somebody wants to put on size, there's a process for doing it. You can get away with a lot if size only is the objective, and then you'll take off the bad size later. For most people on a day-to-day basis, I think you need to find what works best for you, and and that is largely dependent on social circumstances. Because there's a lot of guys that can thrive really well on doing the intermittent fasting type of thing, where, for some of the days of the week, they're fasting for 19 hours and then eating whatever they want, essentially, in the 5-hour window. But if that 5-hour window, it has to start after you finish training so you can recover from the training. It has to coincide with family dinner, that kind of thing. It might not work. Some people use a 16-8. You fast for 16, your feeding window opens, 8 hours, you eat, you let it digest, you train, you eat again. That might be a better structure. Some people will, thrive a bit more on eating, small meals frequently throughout the day because they graze, depending, on their work kind of thing. As long as they make good choices about what to graze on, why not? It's a temperament thing and a social thing, really more than a strict regime thing that I think works best for most people.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Looking back
on... and quit drinking.
Yeah. Okay. Looking back on 300 now, I think that was almost like a watershed moment for people changing the way they trained, kind of thing. Did you think it would be as big as it was, in terms of how everybody suddenly went, I want to do this functional stuff. I want to be able to move as well as I look, kind of thing.
We had no idea what was coming. It's just. And for me, I'm in a bit of a bubble most of the time. That at that point, we'd been doing our gym project for when that started. We've been kind of doing it for about 2 years, but I'd been training for climbing my whole adult life, and for me, all of those movements, many of them were natural. I mean, I've used machines. I used, of course, because that was what was available then. But once we started the gym project, I just thought, okay, this is just what we're doing. And it seemed pretty natural to me to move in that way and to use those tools because, man, then I don't have to go to a place that provides the machines for me. Then I don't have to go through a process of conversion of whatever strength that I gained on these machines and then turn them into 3 dimensions, which was my world when I was climbing. So to me, it seemed completely natural that would happen, but I had no idea that people would see this on screen and become utterly convinced by the utility of it or wanting to do it. And we had a feeble little website at the time on a feeble little server somewhere in Salt Lake. And in the month after that movie came out, we had almost 13 million hits, just under 500,000 unique visitors, I think, something like that. I mean, it was crazy. The thing fell apart, and we had to get more we had to buy more bandwidth and stuff for just so people could come and go, what is this crazy? Okay, and I think a lot of people came and just went, all right, that's completely out of control. What they're doing, I don't have access to that. I don't want to. If that's what this requires, then maybe I don't want it that bad. And then there were a lot of other people who went and said, okay, I want this. This makes sense. I'm willing to do it. And our project has grown off the back of that. Even though, I wasn't prepared for it, wasn't willing to capitalize on it in a sense. I mean, I realized at one point where if I'd had a T-shirt to sell, when that movie came out, I'd be retired.
Cool. I think that's almost everything I wanted to ask. Just as a last thing, what is I ask people this a lot, one piece of advice you would give to anyone who kind of wants to make a change in their life? Not necessarily fitness, just attitude.
I think we get I'll circle back to something I said before. I think we get in the habit of settling for less, of there not being, often we need a reason to do something. And so come up with a reason. A lot of times in our gym, people will have been training there for a while and only training and not applying it to anything. And we'll say, look, you need to put this to use. Because if you decide, whatever it is, I mean, I'll use an example. There's a woman, Lynn, that trains in the gym. She's, at the time of this, when we sort of kicked her out of the nest and said, yes, you can still train here, but you have to do something. I think she was 53 years old at that point. And she decided, okay, I want to do like an off-road triathlon kind of thing. That kind of speaks to me right now. But she didn't know how to swim. In fact, she almost drowned when she was a child. So swimming was the furthest thing from her head. But through the training process, she had arrived at a point where she had the psychological skill, wherewithal to take swim lessons as an adult, to learn to swim as an adult, to overcome this childhood fear that she had in order to do this thing that she had decided was important. And so for me, it's always going to come down to something like that. Pick an objective, train for that objective, fulfill it. It could be anything, a sporting thing. Okay, maybe it's a Spartan race. Maybe it's one of these obstacle course things. Maybe it's you want to, look, I've always wanted to climb a mountain. Maybe no, or maybe, I'll just start saying stuff that I'm interested in or whatever. Or maybe for in your case, okay, MMA, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay, once you have that objective and you have a test, something that tests what you do in the gym, then it gives all of the training that you do on a day-to-day basis and all of the attention that you pay 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, more importance, because you're going to get up against it at some point, and you're, especially in a jiu-jitsu context or whatever, or climbing, you will be shown when you fall short. And I think that's probably the sort of one thing across the board, I would say.
Awesome. Mark, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For more of the best functional strength training around, click the button on the left to see the Russian Special Forces inspired Tactical Strength Challenge, or hit the button on the right to see UFC fighter Jimmy Manua's MMA workout. And don't forget to hit the logo on the top left to subscribe.